I'm Françoise. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. In today's watercolor painting, we're creating a beautiful galaxy with gold, and I'm going to give you 5 tips to make your galaxy watercolor paintings more strikingly beautiful. Let's get started with my number 1 tip. My first tip, and it's a crucial thing to do, especially when it comes to watercolor backgrounds, is to layer in order to add depth to your background. We could think there is no need to layer with watercolors since it's easy to work fast and in a loose style with this medium. But to create depth with watercolors, the first thing you want to focus on is layers. Unless, like I said, you want to achieve a very loose style, and that's totally fine, for a background like a galaxy background, it's a good idea to layer your paints several times to include subtle changes of color and gradients all over the painting. Here, for instance, what I'm doing is I start with a light layer of paint that allows me to place each color where I want it to be. This first layer is going to guide me throughout the rest of my painting, so it's an important one. It won't look pretty at first, but that's normal and is totally okay. When you're done with this initial layer, you can either keep building on top of it with more color and less water as the paper is starting to dry, if you're used to working with watercolors already and you feel comfortable with water control. And it's what I've chose to do. Otherwise, if you're a beginner especially, a better approach is to let your paper dry completely after this first layer and then wet it again to apply another layer, and you keep doing this until you're satisfied. The colors in that second layer and the next ones should always be a tad darker than the ones underneath, which means that the mixes you dip your paintbrush in are going to be thicker and thicker with pigment. It's what I'm doing here now. And thanks to my first layer, I'm confident to where to apply my quinacridone gold here in the center, then my blue shade all around, and finally my pink shade in places. It's easier to build a second layer of those paints on top of a light one. Here I'm covering everything up with a second layer because I want the end result to look deep and dark. Remember, watercolors dry a lot lighter than they are when wet. Imagine that as I layer, my 3 colors are starting to overlap each other in places, and that is what creates beautiful depth and a sense of realism in a painting, layer after layer. It's also why, when you paint any background in watercolor with more than one color, I highly recommend that you overlap those colors a bit as spontaneously as possible. You'll see me do it this way in all the watercolor videos on this channel. Now for a watercolor galaxy like this one, I tend to apply at least 3 layers, sometimes 4 or even 5 until I'm satisfied, but usually after the 3rd layer, my background is already really smooth and beautiful with depth. Extra layers usually help me make the galaxy even deeper or sometimes also fix little things. Before I dive into the next tip, let me add that after getting some requests and feedback on Instagram, I'm making this video today, and I also have a Skillshare class on galaxies in the works, maybe even 2 of them, one for beginners and a more complex one with realistic silhouettes. In my Skillshare classes, I go in depth way more, and I guide you through the process of painting one or several paintings from A to Z. So if you're watching this video in January 2021 or later, and you want to master the art of watercolor galaxy painting, I invite you to look for the class link in the description of this video since it will be out and ready by then. My second tip for striking galaxies is to use a variety of colors in your galaxy, especially when galaxies appear to be mainly black with a few white stars. And in reality, there is a lot more to it than that, and it will show through in your painting if you make the effort to use a few colors. I'd say 2 or 3 is already a good place to start. In this one, there are a lot of colors, so I got my Daniel Smith watercolors, but any other brand of watercolor you have will do if you want to paint this galaxy right here. I'm using quinacridone gold, it's the yellow shade, pink and blue with a bit of neutral tint. Neutral tint is a dark gray shade. I also decided to use a gold powder that you can mix with watercolors to make my painting look even more fun. You can refer to the list of my supplies in the description if you need more detail about it. If you take a look at my reference photo now, the very light and very dark tones and various colors are pretty obvious. What we can't see that clearly, and that's what will make a huge difference, is that those colors do overlap each other. That's why watercolors are a great medium to paint backgrounds like these with, since colors can move and intermix thanks to the water. And my point is we need to use this to our advantage. That's exactly why here, if we take a look back at my first layer, I applied so much pink when on the photo we can barely see any. If we can see some on the photo, chances are there is more underneath we cannot see. I could also, here in the third layer, keep using my quinacridone gold color to cover those yellowish and brownish areas, but since this galaxy is full of stars and what looks like some kind of stardust, I imagined that the gold would add a little something extra here, and I started applying a bit of it. This type of decision is very subjective, and I'm sure many people could paint their own beautiful versions of this photo with very different colors and variations in the techniques. There are no set rules. The various layers and various colors do work well for me and get me gorgeous results with backgrounds. To help you pick the colors for your galaxy, take a look at the photo you're using and try and think about what colors you could use and where before you even get started. 2 or 3 colors can be enough, maybe more. You may not want to use too many or it may get confusing for you. Remember, watercolors do mix and turn into different colors when mixed, so all you really need to do is to identify the main colors in your photo and go from there. My third tip is to use movement when you paint. Let's take this galaxy as an example. It's a spiral. I could try and replicate every line I see there to make my painting look like the spiral. Instead, I use the movement of my wrist to imitate the pattern, and I do it spontaneously. It's best not to overthink it, just keep in mind what the overall shape is. I noticed that when you paint or draw, sometimes it's not about trying to copy exactly what you see, but rather use movement. Notice also that I did not wait till the last layers to paint those arch shapes to create my spiral. I did it right from the beginning, because just like when I placed the colors, using movement right away is guiding me throughout the whole process. Once the first strokes and directions of the strokes are there on paper, all we have to do is keep building on top of it. My fourth tip for beautiful galaxies in watercolor painting is to go dark. Don't be afraid of going darker with each layer. At first, I picked a shade called Lunar Blue as my dark shade. It turned out to be a granulating color, which means the pigment separates from the binder and makes the watercolor look textured. I was using this shade for the first time, so I didn't know, and I switched for indigo later in the process to make sure my paint will look smooth. Indigo and Lunar Blue are not quite the same shades, but they're both dark blues. I even added some neutral tint in there to make my indigo darker. And you can see here in my very last layer that even though the edges are pretty dark already, I'm not afraid to add more indigo. And you can see there's a lot of pigment in there and a little water, because I want it very dark. I am only careful here not to cover up too much of the other colors when colors are this dark. You can also see how I use movement again to make it look like it's melting naturally into the other colors. My fifth tip for gorgeous galaxies in watercolor painting is to use white gouache to create highlights that pop. In this painting, I started to include the gouache in the third layer. I didn't bother to use it in the initial layers since, first of all, white gouache wouldn't show much on white paper or light colors. Then, with my layering technique, it would mix with the colors when there's a lot of water, and it would spoil them. And in the end, everything would look spoiled, lighter in color, and there would be no clear trace of the white gouache anymore. So when I add some in a galaxy, I'll wait till I have a few layers down already, and I also try and use it with very little water so it stays thick and visible as it dries. Remember that the more layers I apply, the thicker my paints are. That means they spread less far, and that's also why I prefer to use gouache at that time in the process. I had a hard time preserving the very bright hole in the center of the painting. Initially, I was trying to preserve the white of the paper, but the watercolors kept spreading on there, so you can see that here. In the fourth and last layer, I am literally painting the hole with the gouache, and I add more highlights that overlap onto the previous ones. The best part to finish adding cool highlights to galaxy painting is to splatter the gouache to create the stars. Here, I'm even adding huge stars for maximum effect. Don't forget to add a little more gold too if you're wanting to paint the spiral, if you have some. Otherwise, you'll be fine with dark tones and white gouache to contrast as well as the colors I mentioned. I hope you enjoyed these 5 tips. Remember to look for my class link in the description of this video if you'd like more guidance, tips, techniques, and beautiful paintings to paint along with me in real time. And also, to help me boost this video, please like, share, leave me a comment, and consider subscribing. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.